Welcome. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Kanwar Singh, which tries to establish a new science called consciousness. And I have some very hard questions against it because there are already existing sciences which deal with consciousness. So why a new science? Hello, first of all, Dr. Singh.
Thanks, Miss Brand, for having me.
So could you introduce a little bit your new science, what you try to establish?
Yeah, I am trying to create awareness about the possibility of a new branch of science, which is basically standing on the foundation of the most fundamental and the greatest questions about this existence, about this universe. And that new branch of science, it is ultimately aimed to take us all towards a new kind of discovery, the discovery of the consciousness. The consciousness, which is also a kind of reality, the way we have other kinds of realities. But maybe the consciousness, it has never been treated as that a kind of concrete reality as it could have been created. So that is the branch of science which I am trying to propose about the research and the discovery of the consciousness. Not just the research of the consciousness, but the discovery of the consciousness as a new kind of fundamental reality.
So the consciousness now, what I could get, has to be investigated in other ways than it had been investigated before. Is that the point? What is different now to previous research?
You're absolutely right that earlier also the researches which are aimed at the consciousness, which are basically attempts to understand the consciousness, they are also happening in the purview of the neuroscience, in the purview of the neurophysiology. But the problem is we are trying to discover that consciousness, we are trying to understand that consciousness in other humans, as if that consciousness it is not present within us. We are trying to understand that consciousness by putting other people in the functional MRI machines or gathering their brain scans, forgetting this central point that if that very consciousness is having the nearest access within our own self, shouldn't it first be studied in the form of our own consciousness? Because the effect of the consciousness in some other person, it will be a kind of indirect effect. It is a kind of secondary effect. For example, we can see that what that consciousness it is basically creating in the brain of a person, the brain of the person whom we are seeing in the form of functional MRI. For example, the person who is in the state of imagination, the person who is in a state of sleep, who is in a state of dream. But all those are basically indirect effects of the consciousness. That is not direct evidence of the consciousness. That is not direct discovery of the consciousness as a kind of naked reality. Because it is an indirect approach, is the very consciousness, it is present before that experiential self. It is nearest to us, within us. So the new kind of approach which I'm trying to bring in the research of the consciousness is that the consciousness, if it is ultimately to be discovered, and through the discovery of the consciousness, we are to solve this age-old mind-body problem. That what is the real face of this universe, then firstly we should try to understand that the nearest and the direct, the best approach to the consciousness, it is not an outwardly kind of approach, but it is rather an inwardly kind of approach. Then only the discovery of the consciousness, it is ultimately going to happen.
So it appears to me as an ontological question that is it a aspect of the perspective that the current research is on kind of a third person perspective and we have to go to kind of a first person perspective to investigate the consciousness in ourselves only, or what is here now? Is that the new aspect, or do I see it wrong, or is there something different?
Of course, there is a change in perspective also, but perspective is basically to create a certain kind of idea. So, a perspective can basically create a new kind of philosophy. But we are not talking here about a certain kind of philosophy or certain kind of idea or a certain kind of perspective. I am basically saying that the only way, the only door, the only instrument through which that consciousness it can be ultimately discovered, it is not an outwardly approach. It is never going to be discovered that way, even if we are going to try for thousands of years to come. The day that consciousness it will be ultimately discovered, the day that greatest reality it will be ultimately discovered, it will be discovered from wherever the consciousness it is present nearest to us, and that is within our own self. So perspectives, of course, they are important. But we should try to understand that perspectives can be different for different people. For example, you might be having a different kind of perspective about the same kind of reality. But that is not the case here. We cannot have different perspectives about the existence of sun. The sun is a reality. We cannot have different perspectives about the existence of moon. The moon is a hard concrete reality. In the very similar way, the consciousness, when I am saying that it is only discoverable in an inwardly kind of experimentational approach, not outwardly kind of experimentational approach, it is not about a perspective. It is rather the only way. It is rather the only reality, the only method. For example, if we want to look at the distant stars, we have to look it through the telescope. We cannot look at the distant stars through the microscope because the microscope, it has not been built that way. So if we will try to understand the consciousness from an outwardly kind of approach, then it will be just like looking at the universe through a microscope, which is never going to happen. That consciousness, it has to be understood, it has to be discovered only through an inwardly kind of approach. That is the only way. It is not just about perspective or philosophy, but it is about the concrete reality. It is the only door which is having the consciousness lying behind it.
So it's not only the perspective, you now mention it several times, it's kind of an experiment. Now I'm curious about
Yes,
that kind of experiment. And for me,
that's
the
right.
question arises how this experiment happens. Could you explain or could you reveal something from this
Yeah,
kind of science, this kind of experiments?
yeah. Now, see, experimentation is, of course, it is basically meant to discover any new kind of reality. But firstly, it is important to ascertain that where that subject it is actually present, the subject which is to be experimented with. So, firstly, we have to locate the consciousness. Firstly, we have to pinpoint it, that where it is present. That consciousness, it is present within our own self. We are that consciousness, our experiential self. When we say that I am present, when we say that I am a kind of subjectivity, so if it has to be discovered, it has to be discovered from there. Now, we should secondly try to understand that if we are already that consciousness, then what is the reason behind it? That even if we are that consciousness, but still we are curious about the consciousness. Isn't it a kind of paradox? That we are that consciousness, but still the consciousness, it has become a kind of enigma for the whole world. So secondly, we should try to understand that why this thing is basically happening. This thing is basically happening because our central being, because our experiential self, it is almost always, throughout our whole lifetime, it has always become a kind of, in a far-sighted approach. It is always dragged by our sense organs. It is always designed to look away from its own self. So we might be aware about the realities of all the things which we are surrounded by. But in the end, we are not aware about our own reality because we are not even looking at our own self. We are always dragged by whatever kind of sensation our sensory organs they are basically bringing. So, firstly, we should try to understand that pinpointing the consciousness, locating the consciousness, that it is present at the centralmost being of us. And secondly, that why we are not being able to understand our own self. That it is being basically dragged by our human nervous system, by the sensations coming from our sense organs. And once these two things are basically established, then we can talk about the experimentations. That how to basically delineate, how to basically detach our own self, our own consciousness from the stimulations, from the sensations which are coming from the nervous system, the sensations which are coming from the sensory organs. Of course, it is obvious to say, if we are already that consciousness, but still we are unaware about our own reality. And the only reason for it is just being farsighted because we are always looking away due to our sense organs, due to the human nervous system. Then the only possible solution is, the very obvious solution is to basically detach us, to basically delineate us from the sensations which were coming from the human nervous system. But it is not as simple as it is said. The central idea which I am trying to explain here regarding the discovery of the consciousness, it is ultimately going to be discovered in the very same manner, the way I have described. It is not going to be discovered by putting people in the MRI machines or gathering their EEG scans. It is ultimately going to be discovered once we are able to detach our consciousness from the stimulations of the human nervous system. So, this is the central idea about the kind of experimentation, the foundation of it.
Okay, actually, we wanted to avoid to take old philosophy, but now there arises something inside of me, like it appears kind of the problem of duality, actually, because you said several times that on the one hand we are the consciousness, but on the other hand we try to investigate it. So there is a dual problem which we have here
Yeah.
now,
It's a
and
paradox, yeah.
and this is what the science want to solve. Or am I wrong? Am I partially right? Could we make it clear, also not only for me, also for our followers?
Yeah. Of course, the scientists want to discover the consciousness. There is no doubt about it. They want to understand the consciousness. There is not even a single doubt about it. The only thing which I am trying to explain here is that our current approach it is not right. For example, if you want to know that how is the Berlin city in the Germany, you cannot just simply sit in city of some other country in New Delhi and just try to think about that what might be present in the Berlin in that city, that how the roads of the city, how the buildings of the city can be. In the very similar way, what I am trying to explain that whenever we are trying to understand any kind of reality, then that reality it has to be the subject of the experiment. For example, if you want to look for the craters of the moon, then you will have, of course, to point your telescope towards the moon. It cannot be possible that you are pointing your telescope towards the ground and you will be able to look at the craters of the moon. Similarly, our consciousness, if it is to be understood, that should be the subject of the inquiry. That should be the subject of the experimentation. And it is not being experimented with. We are simply trying to look at its indirect effects by putting people in machines, by seeing that what kind of brain functionings happen in a person who is in a kind of imagination. Of course, the occipital cortex will be more active, but that is not going to take us towards the consciousness. The consciousness, it is ultimately activating that occipital cortex. It is basically known, but those nerve cells which are present in the occipital cortex, those are just having those action potentials, those biological wires in form of neurons, in the form of sodium, potassium, or calcium ions, which are simply moving across the cell membranes. It is again not taking us towards the consciousness. So the point which I'm trying to make here, that the subject of the inquiry, which is our own experiential self, that is being ignored. Why the scientific community it is so much hesitant, shying away, rather scared to discover our own self. So that is the point which I'm trying to make here.
Thank you very much for these explanations until now. But still, there are some points I have to raise. There are two aspects. Actually, consciousness still is, I saw the dualistic aspect, but now I can concrete define it even more. It's kind of, first of all, it's a subject of inquiry on the one hand, and on the other hand, it is part of the investigator. It is part of the research method. Is not the method itself, but when the method is related to the observer, then also the consciousness is there, but also it is the research item. So how can we overcome that? Or is there a possibility, or is this part even of the new science?
Of course, it is a very important question that when we create a kind of separation between who is experimenting and whom we are experimenting on, it creates a kind of duality. That duality is not just as a kind of separation from the observer and what is being observed, but this is also a wrong way of experimentation. As I had described in my previous answer, also, that of course, even if we talk about the consciousness which is present even within us, for the observation of that consciousness, We will also be an observer.
What about validity and reliability on the new science of consciousness? The research method or the experiments, are they reliable enough? Could you give some evidence that they are reliable enough? Is there enough validity that we can use these experiments, that they are profound enough for a science?
So that is something, of course, very interesting about science, that the reliability of any experiment, the certainty of any experiment, it is ultimately known basically once that experiment is done. Beforehand, if we try to assume that this experiment it can yield a kind of result, or this experiment it will not be able to yield any kind of result, so that will be a kind of assumption driven science. So in a proper scientific method, the experiment should be done. You just try to delineate your consciousness from the draggings of your sense organs, and let's see if you are able to discover that ultimate reality which I am talking about, then I am right. If you are not able to discover it, then I'm ready to be proven wrong, but ultimately I'm going to be proven right, because I know that that is the result of the experiment. So any kind of experimentation, it has to be ultimately validated. After running the experimentation, we should not be hesitant. And that is how basically the science has ever progressed. People have tried to do the most weirdest kind of experimentations, basically to know a new kind of reality. So if I am saying that our consciousness it is ultimately going to be discovered in that kind of experimentation, now let's try that experimentation. If results are there, then its validation it is already justified.
Okay, validation will appear with the results automatically.
Yes.
Again,
Always it happens with all the kinds of experimentations. Whatever kind of experimentation it has ultimately been done, it has its validation is after it. Before it, hypothesis can be there. Before it, our ideas can be there, but ideas generally do not have any place, or rather, in reality, they should not have that kind of space, because if we were just driven by ideas, then you might be having different idea about consciousness. I might be having different idea about consciousness, and we will be writing your treatise and I will be writing my treatise. Like there is a difference of opinion. But when we talk about experimentation, its validation, it's ultimately known only after that experimentation is basically done, not before it.
that again brings me back to the question. I want to investigate more what exactly is the research about. I want to know, is there a certain research method which already exists, or is it using a new research method, a new science as a
Yeah,
new research method, or kind like that?
yeah, yeah. That's why I am saying that we have to create a new branch of science for it, because it is an absolutely a new research method. It is absolutely a new and a radical way of inquiry. It is absolutely new. Nothing has been tried like that in psychology, in the neuroscience, in neurology, in neurophysiology before it. Nothing has been tried. Psychology is quite old. Neuroscience is also, even if it is an emerging field, but still lot of kinds of inquiries are being done, but nothing of that sort it has ever been done. No neuroscientist, no psychologist has ever tried to discover his or her own consciousness. They might be trying to understand the indirect effects of the consciousness. So definitely whatever I'm saying, it is absolutely new.
Still, I am so curious. You now mention it again. It is a very, and you exactly said it, it's a very new research method. And I would be curious if you could reveal something about how it works, how it exactly works. What, when I'm a participant, for example, what must I do?
Okay. Now, firstly, we should try to understand that, as I've described earlier, that firstly we should situate the consciousness that we are that consciousness, we are that experiential self. That thing has been ascertained. After that, the second thing which has to be ascertained, that why we are not being able to understand our own self if we are that consciousness already. That is because we are always far-sighted due to our sense organs. That thing is that it has also been ascertained. Now, coming to that experimentation part. For that experimentation, we will try to understand that how that dragging of our human consciousness it is basically happening. That how our human nervous system it is basically curtailing us from this great reality of the universe, because of course it is one universe. Of course it is one existence. But even if it is one existence, but somehow we are of this belief that we are just a human. You might be of this belief that you are Miss Brandt, a different human. I am a different human. The things which are present in our room, they are different. But aren't we missing a very important point, that it is one existence? Aren't we missing this very important point, that this is one universe? Your reality is also that existence. My reality is also that existence. So we are one, already one. But we are in a kind of illusion due to our sense organs, due to our human nervous system. But how it is basically creating that kind of illusion, that kind of farsightedness, that has to be firstly properly understood. That how basically the human mind, it is being created. The human mind, which is, of course, even the best physiology books, they accept this thing, that we are not in a position at the moment to absolutely comment and locate that where the human mind, it is actually present. So that human mind which is being created, which is composed of our thoughts, our memories, imaginations, the different kinds of engagements which we go through as a kind of human awareness, those things should be firstly properly understood. That how that human mind, it is basically created within us. The sense organs, the human nervous system, it is one aspect. It is a very outwardly, a very distant aspect. It is basically bringing a kind of sensory input. But what that sensory input, it is exactly doing within our consciousness, that our consciousness, it is living in a kind of illusion that if this whole existence is one, but still our consciousness, it is simply believing that it is something separate. Of course, it is undeniable that this is the one universe. Of course, it is absolutely unrefutable. The greatest minds cannot deny it, that this is one existence, but somehow we are believing each other to be separate. We are believing all these objects to be separate. So how that human mind, it is being created, the sensory organs, they are one aspect. They are one step. The human nervous system, it is one step. But how that human nervous system, it is creating the human mind in the human consciousness, in the form of our memories, our thoughts, our imaginations, that has also to be understood. So the experimentation, it is not just to delineate us from the sense organs or from the nervous system, but it is also to delineate us, also to detach us from the human mind, because the human mind, it is created in the consciousness. It is not created in the nervous system. It can be created under the effect of the activities in the human nervous system. But if ultimately any neuroscientist wants to discover that ultimate truth, ultimately they want to discover that consciousness, which they are of course very curious about, they have to cross two walls. The outer wall of this fort is of the sense organs, is of the human nervous system. The inner wall is of the human mind. Then only that central being, the consciousness, will be ultimately known in its purest and the truest form. So this is the central idea, that how basically I'm trying to describe this kind of experimentation. It, of course, it is very detailed, because our mind, it is very complex. The sensory inputs which are coming from our sense organs, they are also very complex. So the experimentations which will ultimately lead to that knowing of our consciousness in its purest sense, those experimentations will be ultimately focused in somehow breaking that illusion, the illusion which is being created by the human mind, which is continuously detaching us from the wholeness of this universe. And how that human mind, its thoughts, its imaginations, will be ultimately snubbed, so that the reality, it is seen as it is. That is, of course, very detailed, and that's why I'm of this opinion that it needs a new branch of science. It is not something which is coverable, which can be covered in just 5 pages or one chapter of neuroscience. Whole volumes have to be written. Human mind is so complex. How to conquer the human mind? And after conquering the human mind, how to reach that ultimate reality? It is not as simple as it is said. So this is the central idea about the experimentation, which I'm trying to explain. Of course, details are many, because I have to describe this answer in little short. So that is the central idea of it.
Okay, I got it, that even the universe, that is kind of a whole, no, we can imagine that, but still our perception is telling us that we are separate.
Yeah.
But the consciousness as something which is whole, this sounds kind of esoteric. I have to bring it on in this place. The ancient Greece even had a similar aspect. Take only Plotinus, which explained that God is only one, and from one out everything appeared, and still it is one, and it is in everything. And so it appears very similar with the consciousness. And so that is a kind of an esoteric aspect, which actually on the one hand esoteric is there, and on the other hand science is there. So when there is an esoteric
Yeah.
aspect which appears, it is not even Eastern
Yeah.
philosophy, it's Western, it is included everywhere, that there is this
Yeah.
one, this wholeness, but also there is this separation. But now there is the problem, when it's esoteric, then it is no science, then it's a problem.
Yeah. It's a very good point which you have actually raised here. And I really thank you for raising this point. So let me justify that what I have to say about it. Now suppose if I ask you this question, that is this whole universe one? Is it reality or not? This is one universe. Is it reality or not? Just answer me.
This is a reality, that
Yes.
is true.
Yeah. Is it esoteric?
That aspect not. I also said that
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
is this
So it is,
universe,
yeah,
and
it is,
everything inside of it
yeah, it
is
is
there.
scientific. And again, if I ask you this question, that is this existence one, that what will be your answer?
From my perspective, my personal perspective, which is limited to the senses and to the way of thinking, of
No,
course, I would say no, it's not one.
try to listen my question again. I'm asking you, is this one existence? Existence means it is also including the universe and wherever even the matter is not present. Existence. Is this one existence? Is it one reality? Okay. Is it one reality?
It is
Yes. So it is
but
one.
but
Is it?
but
Is
due
it?
to the standpoint that each of the whole separated people or animals also have their own subjective view. It's not
That is
only
perception.
there are many realities, endless
That is
realities.
that is perception. That is subjectivity. I'm not talking about it. I'm talking about the objective reality. Is it one reality? You are also real. Maybe I am also real. Whatever things which are present around us, they are real. Is it one reality? Is it right or wrong?
Research until now says we don't know that.
Of course, it is one reality. Of course, it is one universe. It is one existence. And there is nothing esoteric about it. It is absolutely hardcore science. So when I am saying that this whole existence is one and still we are of this belief that we are something separate, it is not coming from any kind of religion. Everything should be forgotten about. The religions or kinds of philosophies, because philosophies and religions, they always prevent us from knowing the truth. The truth which is present, it will be discovered from the nature. If gravitation was present, and if Isaac Newton had given that formula, by applying that formula, Henry Cavendish, he was 100 years after Isaac Newton, was able to justify that yes, this is the value of the gravitational constant, because it was present in the nature. It was not to be relied upon certain kind of ancient philosophy or some ancient religion. It is already present. And the consciousness which I am trying to explain here, the discovery of which, it is also present in the nature. If there is one existence, if there is one reality, if there is one universe, it is already present. There is no point in relying anything from ancient philosophies. Let's try to discover the reality which is already existing. When we try to base our understandings on the past philosophies, it will just be kind of distractions. If the reality is there, let's discover it. If it's not there, then there is also evidence that it was not present. But let's give a try. And I'm very certain about it that the reality exists in the way I'm describing. The only hesitancy is that it is bit radical. It is bit a new way of inquiry. For example, Copernicus, when he was saying, when the whole world of this was of this belief that the earth is at the center and the sun is revolving around it, Copernicus then said that rather the sun is at the center and the earth is revolving around it. The whole world was against him. Because any kind of radical and revolutionary idea which is ever brought, it appears to be wrong to the majority, wrong to everybody. And that is the proof of that idea that it is ultimately the greatest reality. And that is what has happened with Copernicus about his heliocentric model. So much so that even the word revolutionary, it comes from the revolutions of the earth which it does around the sun. That was the great contribution of Copernicus. So similarly, when I am talking that we should not be relying upon some kind of religions or philosophies if that reality is existing. If Copernicus, if he was right, then his reality was justified by the telescopes. There was no point was in talking about any philosophy or any idea, any religion. So similarly, if I am saying that beyond our sense organs, beyond our human mind lies certain kind of consciousness, lies certain kind of unified reality, then if it is present, it will be discovered. If it is not present, it will be proof that it was not there, but it is there and it is ultimately going to be discovered.
That is a good point. But it brought me, on the one hand, I'm very curious. I'm even now in the position I want actually to go in such an experiment because I'm really curious personally. But on the other hand, there is still this point that I feel that you state something as well as Copernicus did. And this state we have to investigate a little more. And so therefore I have a small example. Let's take a stone. So
Okay.
with your thesis, you would say when the consciousness is everywhere, it's a wholeness, it's one. And then also the same consciousness that I have is the same consciousness the stone has. Or even from the current research, they would say that even the stone has no consciousness, but you would say that the stone even has consciousness. Is that true?
Basically, no, the consciousness where it is present or where it is not present. I am not, or rather, I should not talk about it at the current moment. But the point which I am trying to stress upon is firstly to discover that if it is present in the stone after and it is known after the discovery that yes, it was present in the stone, then it will be known after the discovery. At the current moment, even if I say that the consciousness, it is also present in the sun, it is also present in the moon, it is also present in the walls of your house, there is no point in it. So the point is that firstly we should be inspired, convinced for that discovery. Once the discovery happens, of course you will also be able to know that yes, it is present everywhere. For example, 150 years ago, the psychologists, the greatest psychologists, were of this opinion that the human consciousness, it is just a creation of the human brain, and it is rather limited to our human body. That the human consciousness, our awareness, our subjectivity, it is just our specific quality which is specific to Homo sapiens. That was the belief of psychologists just 150 years ago. But what has happened today? The very recent scientific researches have shown that the very same kind of consciousness, the kind of consciousness and subjectivity we are having, the kind of qualia, it is also present in the dolphins. When they look into the mirrors, they are also having the same kind of experience of self. Similarly, the octopus, they are also having the same kind of qualia. So our horizons of the consciousness, they are expanding from the human. Now it is to other animals, even in the birds. The birds are having that a kind of complex problem solving ability, the kind of problem solving ability is present within us. So our horizons of the consciousness earlier, 150 years ago, they were just adamantly believing that it is just centered at the human. But now it is scientifically proven that it is present in other living beings, and slowly this horizon, it is ultimately going to expand. But it is not just something which is said, not just something I am saying, not a new kind of philosophy or idea. I want it to be a kind of discovery. I want all the neuroscientists, all the curious minds to see that reality, a naked reality. And then they should ascertain that if it was present in the stones or not.
Okay, I got it. So the new science is not about stating something, it's more like
Yes.
open-minded that
Science
there is
is always
something.
about, Yeah, science is never about stating something. Science is always about experimentation. And the moment science will start stating something, it will become a religion. It will
Yes,
become a
the
philosophy.
dogmas.
And that's what we want. And that's what we do not want. We want that experimentation to be preserved in also the field of consciousness.
And that is exactly what we want. Even I'm
Yes.
very curious, really. And I thank you so much. Still, there are some smaller questions left. For which person, for which people are these kind of experiments? Must this be a certain group of people, older people, younger people, only researchers, a certain group of society, a certain group of social economic status, or kind like that?
Yeah. So this is a very good question. Basically, every person has consciousness, every person has human mind. So practically this experiment is feasible for everybody. Practically. But this is a kind of utopian or ideal situation. The people who will be more ready for this kind of experimentation, firstly, they will be the neuroscientists or the psychologists, neurophysiologists, who basically want to know the consciousness. Secondly, will be that kind of people who have known so much about this world, who are curious about the answers to the fundamental questions of this universe. For example, who want to know that why everything is basically present, who basically want to know that what this material is, even for the physicists, who want to understand that what is actually happening in the depths of this universe. The material which appears very concrete, what is its true nature? So the physicists, they are also candidates for this kind of experimentation if they want to know that reality. And similarly, the people who are very concerned about, through their intelligence, they have known so much about this existence. They have collected so much knowledge, and now they are ready to see their own ignorance. For example, someone like Socrates. When Socrates said that his greatest accomplishment, his greatest knowledge, is not exactly knowledge, but his greatest knowledge is rather the knowledge of this thing that he knows nothing. So that kind of people who are very intelligent inherently, who have known so much about this existence, and now they're ready for that final and that last jump of reality, for that greatest knowledge. So practically each and every person is eligible for this experimentation, ideally, because everyone has consciousness, everyone has mind. So of course everybody should be able to discover the consciousness, but in reality, the people who will be more inclined towards such a kind of experimentation will be these kinds of people which I have just described.
That means more like open-minded people which not know already so much. Even they
Curious,
can know
curious
much,
people.
but they are about, yeah, but they are about letting go their old knowledge. For,
Yeah.
of course, for an open-minded new science branch. Now we have talked about the who, the participants. This also brings me to the next question, which is about the where it is. Must one come personally to your research institution, or is this kind of research also possible alone at home or via these connections, while we are doing this conversation now using this technical stuff here? And maybe this is also possible for participants and maybe interesting and so easier to take part in this kind of science, in these experiments.
Of course, through our institution, we are of this opinion that such kind of experimentation it should be begun. But apart from that, at the larger scale also, once this awareness it is basically brought, so these kinds of experimentations can be done in any kind of lab of neuroscience throughout the world, throughout the globe, not necessarily in our institute, but any institute. But once the crux of the matter, once the way to go into that reality it is understood, then these experimentations they can be done even at the home, even at new labs or already existing labs, already existing research institutions.
Okay, experiments are possible live and even online and even alone at home one day when the new science is developed so far. But for now, for example, when we would do an experiment now, also it is very limited to the screen. When I would do the experiment alone, I don't even know what to do. But when we would do the experiment and it is about wholeness. It's about there is consciousness is one. It's one and the same, which is everywhere at the same time. But we are here now as limited and separated people. You are sitting there and I'm sitting in a different country. So how can we then be one when we are even on separate screens?
Okay. So, firstly, when you said that this is one consciousness, this is whole one expanse of consciousness, I'm not even saying that at the outset to begin with. What I'm saying at the outset is that this is one universe, that this is one presence. Of course, it is one presence. If I ask this question, that is this one presence? If you are present, it is your reality. If I am present, it is my reality. It is basically one presence. It is basically one moment, isn't it? One moment of the whole universe, isn't it?
From the objective perspective, of
Yes,
course.
yes, yes. So the final statement that if it is the whole one consciousness, it is not something which everybody is going to agree at the outset. Maybe they will agree once it is discovered. But I'm not even saying it to begin with. I'm saying that firstly we should accept that this is one presence, this is one reality, this is one universe. But if this is one universe, then how come we are believing each other to be separate? Try to understand this point is very interesting and important. Let alone consciousness. Keep aside the consciousness, aside for a moment. If this is one universe, if this is one existence, if this is one reality, if this is one presence, then how come we are saying that this is one part of the screen and this is a different part of screen? Isn't it one existence? Isn't it one universe? Isn't it one reality? We are already one. The problem is that it is just a kind of illusion. And once that illusion is broken, the reality it is seen as it is. Because right now, the kind of reality which we are seeing, it is just the kind of reality which our sense organs, which our human nervous system, it is basically creating. It is just Homo sapiens species specific reality. Just our collective subjective experience. If our sense organs, they are deranged, for example, a person who is color blind, for a colorblind person, this very same reality, it will appear black and white. But for some person whose eyes are functioning normally, whose eyes are having retina properly, that rods and cone cells are present, that chemical in the rods and cone, the rhodopsin is present. For those normally functioning eyes, the universe is colorful, the reality is colorful. But for someone who is colorblind, the reality is absolutely black and white. So the kind of idea of reality which we are having current moment, it is not the real reality. But it is just the way our nervous system, it is basically presenting. For example, the bats, they can perceive the ultrasounds, the frequency of the sounds which is more than 20,000 hertz. But we humans are having a certain range of hearing, certain frequency of hearing, which is just up to 20,000 hertz. So it is just the difference between the species, the kind of subjective experiences different species are actually experiencing. No species, including us, including Homo sapiens, is actually experiencing the universe as it is actually knowing about the real face of this universe. So when we talk about the reality, then firstly we should accept that whatever kind of idea of reality we are already having, it is just a limited idea of reality. We are caged in the human nervous system, we are limited to the capacities of our own species, and when the species change, equally changes the idea of reality even in a single species. With the change of the structure of sense organs, for example, someone who is colorblind, the very same universe appears different. So we should try to understand that this universe is one, the presence is one, existence is one. It is absolutely scientific. No one can absolutely deny it. But if it is one, then how come we are experiencing a kind of separation? Isn't it a proof enough? Isn't it something which is proved just through the base of argument? That if in one universe, if in one reality we are experiencing kind of separation, it is a proof of an illusion. We are not able to look at the real face of this universe and what the discovery of consciousness I'm talking about. It is going to ultimately take us towards the real face, the reality of this universe as it is, the objective truth. Not a subjective reality of Homo sapiens, not a subjective reality of bats, not subjective reality of birds or dolphins, but the objective reality of the universe which is lying beyond the nervous systems of all these species. So that is what I am trying to explain about reality. Hope I have explained my point.
The point which I could get is that the new science is kind of an objective view of an objective reality.
Yes. It is a kind of illusion right now, of course, when we use the language. When we do experimentations, we say that maybe we are seeing kind of objectivity. That whatever kind of observation we are having about the observation, it is objective. But how can it be objective when with the change of the species, different kinds of realities they are perceived? How objectivity can be changed? If objectivity is changed, it is proof enough that it was always, all along, it was just a subjectivity. It was all along just a limited perception, but we are unaware of it. The objective truth, it is still present, but present beyond our limitations.
Yeah, still again, I must raise the point of the esoteric aspect. Again, that we are in the cage of the body, like this reminds me to Plato. We are limited to our senses. So the whole research now works with I think the most important thing are the eyes, because everything which is measured has to be seen. Even also there are the other senses, but in most experiments over all branches, the eyes are the most important things. So, but we are limited, of course, when you compare it with other animals. And so, but even the word illusion remembers me also to aspects from philosophy again, as if there was something in the truth which has been known thousands of years ago, but not still discovered. And now we try to discover, but the point is not in an esoteric way, but instead in a scientific way.
Yeah. So I will try to explain that how anything which is, even if it is scientific, but if it is very extraordinary, it appears to be maybe esoteric. For example, many hundred years ago, the epilepsy, the seizures, the fits, it is now a well known disease. But its treatment, its origin, its cause, it was not properly understood hundreds of years ago. So, all over the world, people were of this belief that whenever someone is having fits, whenever someone is having epilepsy, there is something supernatural about it. There is something esoteric about it. Because it was extraordinary for that time period. So, what I am talking about consciousness, it might appear extraordinary. It is bound to appear unbelievable. And then a kind of sense arises that maybe it is something esoteric. But no, it is not esoteric. It is absolutely hard reality of this existence. And it will be known once the discovery it is ultimately made. So before trying to be doubtful about anything, we should sustain our scientific method, whatever scientific method teaches us. The scientific method, it is so great that it can never cheat us. A human can cheat us. A human can lie. But whatever it can be discovered, whatever it can be known through a kind of experimentation, how it can be refuted. So that's why I'm saying that when we talk about the discovery of the consciousness, and when we are saying that, for example, our perception is limited to sense organs, it is a like of cage. How the existence of a cage is esoteric. Isn't it absolutely right to say that we cannot experience anything beyond our sense organs? What is anything esoteric about it? Isn't it right to say, scientific to say, that whole our lifetime, we are looking at the universe, just the way human eyes are presenting? I will try to explain that how even the word illusion, it is not unscientific, it is not esoteric. For example, in hot days, on the road, the mirage appears. The mirage effect, the reflection of some vehicle, it appears. The reflection is not there, but illusion is there. It is also a scientific fact due to difference of temperatures. So illusions can be existing, can be explained in scientific purview. And similarly, when we talk about the different kinds of illusions of neuroscience, different kinds of clever drawings can be drawn, which can be perceived differently. So the word illusion, it is not unscientific, it is not esoteric. It is absolutely a hard reality. And the way we are perceiving this universe, it is an illusion. One proof for it, if you just want to know the proof, just want to know the evidence. For example, it is a well proven scientific fact that all the matter, it is 99% empty space. Just 1% is having electrons, protons, and the neutrons. Rather, 400 years ago, he had bombarded alpha particles and known that all these seemingly solid objects around us, the wood, the walls, the furniture, they might appear solid, our human body. They might appear concrete. But in reality, 99% of them is empty space. Just 1% is having electrons, protons, and neutrons. But what we are perceiving? Are we perceiving 99% empty space through the human eyes? Or are we perceiving a kind of completeness? So, isn't it a proof that we are, in reality, continuously from many years, living in a kind of illusion? The real face of this universe, it is something else. The objective truth of this universe, it is something else. It has always been something else. The only problem is that we have been farsighted. Our sense organs, they have continuously been dragging us and taking us away from that objective truth of this universe. Hope I am clearing this doubt about
Oh,
the
even
esoteric
that
and scientific.
this
Yeah,
evidence was even greater than that with the ultrasound. No, that it is clear that we are 99, I think even 99.9
yeah,
times 9 after the
that's right.
comma. So that is so much that we are actually almost nothing. That even that is an illusion, that our eyes are just showing that. But how could
Yes.
it be then that the eyes, that the consciousness is so strong, even our subjective part of consciousness, which creates this kind of separation, it's so strong that we really believe that it is even located in the eyes. The illusion is there. We can now talk about it from an objective perspective, but why is it
Yeah.
so in the person that you got my point, right?
Yeah, yeah. I got your
Okay,
point.
okay, great. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So the illusion is basically solidified. The illusion is strengthened. It appears absolutely real. For example, when we are in a dream at night, in dreams also people are moving their legs here and there. In the dream, if someone is running behind you to harm you, to kill you, absolutely you will be scared. Your heart will be fast. Your heartbeat will be fastened. You will also be in a state where your breathing rate also becomes fast. As if in reality someone is running behind you, whereas in reality no one is running. So the perception, it appears, it definitely appears very real right now. Even if the universe it is not like this, the way it is appearing to the human eyes. But this is the whole creation of the perception. The perception, when it is limited to something, it is ultimately going to perceive whatever its capacities are. We cannot look beyond the walls of a room. For example, if we are locked in a room, and if we are asked that what is present outside the room, of course we can never know. There is no way except opening that door. Till we are caged in that room, there is no way. Similarly, till we are caged to the human nervous system, till we are limited in this perception, of course it is going to appear real. That will be our whole world. For example, someone who is born on the island, who is absolutely cut off from the mainstream human society. Whole his lifetime, the person is born on an island in a forest. For that person, the reality will be just that forest. For that person, the reality will be just those trees, those animals, nothing beyond it. So, similarly, when we are of this idea that this reality it appears very real, it appears real because that is only what we know, because we are limited in our abilities. Yeah, so that's the point which I try to explain. That till our limitations they are not expanded through a new kind of experimentation, our idea of reality is not going to change. 1,000 years ago, it was different. Our understanding expanded. But now, where scientific community is standing, we have to go even further. And to go further is no other way Now everything is known about the subatomic world. Now everything is known about the distant galaxies. Still, our curiosity is not being satisfied. Still, the greatest questions of the universe, they are not answered. Still, we are not aware that why the whole existence is present. Because we are missing the greatest discovery. The greatest discovery towards which I want to take the scientific community through great people, through the help of great people like you.
This brings me also to the next question. Because again and again, you say that you have kind of a view that you have discovered something, and this is exactly what the new science is about, but still you are don't stating it. It should be discovered from everyone, from all participants, from everyone, even everyone
Yes.
can do it. But the point is, you have already seen and know that there is kind of an objective truth, isn't that? Or why can you say it? You, on the one hand, it's kind of, it appears like sometimes that you state it, but on the other hand, of course, you say it is to discover for the participants, of course, because we cannot have it at the beginning, but maybe at the end. But it appears as if you would know something more.
Yeah. Yep. Of course, I can say that. Why I don't say that? Because it is not of any value. I tell you why. For example, if Isaac Newton had discovered something, he was talking about his discovery, that this is the discovery, and now you can use this formula, and everybody can reach that discovery. Everybody can know that reality. Isaac Newton was not saying that I have discovered, and that is more important. It was not important. It is never important. Always what is important is that discovery. Always what is important is to share that discovery, is to take others towards that discovery. So that is the kind of perspective I have about it. That is why I never talk much about my own personal self and more about what is the discovery and how it can be brought within the scientific capacities.
Thank you very much. To really understand, I have to raise an earlier example again, division. Still, I'm curious how it can be that there is this illusion, I think, that I see, and that my consciousness is in the vision, is in the eye, which are for us even visible when we
Yes.
look in the mirror, which are for
Yeah.
us kind of material, but
Yeah.
the consciousness actually is somewhere else, or is everywhere at the same time. Also, it could be a greater thing than only limited to the eyes, as an example. So how can this happen?
The consciousness, which is basically working in the human body, it is not just limited to the human eyes. Firstly, we should try to understand that what is the most fundamental and the basic characteristic of the consciousness. The fundamental characteristic of the consciousness is basically its ability to experience. So, if you are able to experience your whole human body, you are experiencing your feet, that means your consciousness, it is present in your feet. If you are experiencing your knees, that means your consciousness, it is also present in your knees. If you are experiencing your body, your eyes, that means that experiential self, it is present there. So, wherever the experiential self lies, there lies the consciousness. It is not just limited to one part of the body. And when we talk about the human eyes, of course, human eyes are one of the organs which are most active organs. And whatever kind of perceptions they are basically arising in form of electromagnetic radiations and falling on the retina, initiating a kind of chemical reaction in the rods and cone cells. That chemical reaction, it is ultimately taken in form of action potentials to the visual cortex in the brain. And from that visual cortex, our consciousness, it is ultimately perceiving. So our experiential self, it is not working alone. It is not something which is separate. But our experiential self, our consciousness, it is continuously working in a kind of unison with the human nervous system. That is why it happens that whenever some damage happens in some part of nervous system, our consciousness, it also perceives as if the damage has happened. So our consciousness and its perception, till it is believing to be human, till it is believing to be just this human body, till it is not free from the human mind, till it is not free from all the illusions, it is going to perceive whatever kind of perception the human nervous system it is basically going to bring. And that is the main point, that why the neuroscientists and the neurologists, they are often confused, that if consciousness is a kind of fundamental reality beyond the human nervous system, then how come it is possible that if a person has some kind of stroke in the brain, then one part of the body is damaged? Then how come it is possible that if a person is having a stroke, then the person is having some kind of memory loss, some kind of different cognitive deficits? These things are basically happening because our consciousness, it is not working alone till it is believing to be human. It is always working in unison with the human nervous system. So that is the point from which the neuroscientists and the neurologists, they often become confused, that if in reality the consciousness was just a kind of fundamental reality which is beyond our human nervous system, then how come it was possible that by damaging certain kind of human nervous system's part, we are able to create a variation in the human consciousness? It is happening because our consciousness, it is not working alone. It cannot work alone as human consciousness. Whenever any consciousness, it believes itself to be human, it has to work in the unison of human nervous system. It is also true that on the one hand, the human nervous system, it is not sufficient to explain the consciousness. And that is also a problem which all the neurologists, they encounter while trying to explain the consciousness, because in the human nervous system, it is nothing but the movement of sodium, potassium, and calcium ions, the action potentials in the brain, in the spinal cord. So, how come all these moving ions, moving chemicals, chemical reactions, ultimately amounting to our experiential self? This is a problem, a well documented problem, which all the neuroscientists, they rather accept, that yes, we are not in a capacity to explain our consciousness just through these ionic and the chemical reaction, ionic and the chemical movements. We need something extra. Of course, that extra is present, but a doubt arises. But if there is something extra, then why it happens that by damaging certain part of human nervous system, our consciousness, it is equally affected? It is happening. We should try to understand that this is a proof. If these ions and chemicals, they are not sufficient to prove the creation of the consciousness, it is proof that a fundamental kind of reality exists which needs to be discovered. And secondly, the point which I am trying to explain, the reason for our confusion, which often arises in the mind of neuroscientists, that the variation in the consciousness, in the human consciousness, it arises with the change in the human nervous system, because the human consciousness, it is basically perceiving the world as it is being perceived by the human nervous system. That is its only capacity. And once that consciousness, it detaches itself from that limitation, once that consciousness, it moves away itself from that illusion that it is not just a human, then the reality, it is of course different. It is bound to be different. It is going to be that objective reality. So hope I am able to explain my point. And if any questions are regarding it, then I can be explaining
I'm
further.
glad that we had the concrete example on the vision. So maybe that could make the point even more clear for all of us, not only for me, even for the followers in general. Dr. Singh, do you want to say anything more about that?
There's a lot to talk about it, and I can talk about these realities whole my lifetime. But for now, I would say that please join our research institute, Fundamental Research in Consciousness, if you really want to be part of this path breaking research.
To connect, you can find down in the video description the link, and also for my channel if you are interested. My channel is about blogs on your self-development path. If you have any questions left on these topics we have discussed here now for so long, then also you can write it down below in the comments. We are looking forward for so many questions. So for now, have a nice week. See you next time. Bye.
Thanks.